I'm Ron Sharp, and this is my story in 7. If you were to ask me what one word I would characterize my life by, there would be many options. I could think of being a husband, being a father, being a son, being an instructor in Kentucky Wesleyan College. But I guess the overarching word I would use to describe myself is a Christian. And then for me, in my journey of faith, what has that meant? For me, what one word would I use to describe my Christian journey and pilgrimage, and what does it look like? So if you were trying to nail me down, that one word that I would come up with to describe my life would be providence. And what I mean by that is, as I look on my life, even from the time I became a Christian in 1976 until now, I can look back and see God's operating in my life. God operating in my life through high school and opening doors of musical opportunity for me. God opening doors of opportunity for me when I was an undergraduate student. God opening doors for me in vocation and what I did. I never thought I would be doing what I'm doing now. I had wanted to serve in the church as a pastor. I had given up on being a music major and thought that dream had come crashing down. But I loved books and I loved to read. And I began to work for Christian publishers. And I was able to be in Christian bookstores and meet authors. And that insatiable love to read just kept reinforcing itself and led me to where I am today. And you can say, how did you get here? What did that look like? And that's where God's providence comes into play. I was working at Barnes & Noble in Pasadena, California, and I saw an ad looking for a phone rep for a Christian publisher. And when I read the description, it sounded like me on paper. So I went, interviewed, and the people I interviewed with said, "We've actually hired for the position, but we wanted to talk to you before we made the final call." And so I got the job, and I loved it. And there were only 2 companies that I was willing to go to work for other than that. One of them, there was an opening, and I applied, and I got the position. I loved being out on the West Coast and calling on my Christian bookstores. But then how people read began to change. And as people began to change their reading habits, they weren't really in need of printed books. And so my position was terminated, and God's providence worked its way out in that because we had the opportunity to look for a position. And looking for the position, the decision was, would we stay in Southern California, my wife and son, or would we move to Phoenix, Arizona? And we moved to Phoenix, Arizona and Grand Canyon University. Well, they began to make the same transition from regular printed textbooks to ebooks, and I didn't want to look for a job while our son was in high school, finishing up his sophomore year, and moved between his junior and senior years. So I said, let's look for a job. And within the same company, I interviewed for a position at Spalding University in Louisville. And when I interviewed for them, they said, would you consider Kentucky Wesleyan College? So in 2009, I came to Owensboro, Kentucky, and I drove across the Blue Bridge, and I called my wife and I said, if they make me an offer, we're coming. This feels like home. And since 2009, Owensboro has been our home. Even at Kentucky Wesleyan, God's providence has operated in a multitude of ways. I was managing the bookstore in what's now the Student Success Center and the Winchester Center. Then out of the blue, I got a call to go on a church staff, and I was there almost 3 years. God's providence at work, orchestrating circumstances for me. Then in 2014, Dr. Jim Coleman sent me an email on a Friday afternoon, and he said, I usually don't do this, but we have an opening for a teacher in the religion department. Would you be interested? I said yes, and that one yes has led to subsequent yeses. And this fall is the 10th year, beginning of my 10th year of teaching here at Kentucky Wesleyan. If you would have asked a younger me how my path would have looked, it would be very different. But I look back on it, and what I see is God directing each step of the way, Leaving Los Angeles to go to Phoenix prepared me to go to Owensboro and Kentucky Wesleyan College to manage the bookstore. And then when I went to the church staff, that allowed me to go to graduate school, increase my training. And that opened the door for me to come back to Kentucky Wesleyan College in 2014 to teach. And I've been here ever since. And so when I think of God's providence, I think of how God directs our steps, that every decision is important. There are no small decisions. And we don't need to overcomplicate it. My students know I'll say this to them, that our focus isn't so much on getting from A to Z, it's in getting from A to B. And once we get from A to B, then we can go from B to C. So in all the hats I wear as husband, son, father, instructor of religion, Sigma Nu faculty advisor, pastor of a church in Ohio County, in all that, there is one consistent, and that God has providentially orchestrated the events of my life to bring me to this point. What the future holds, I don't know. But I do know this, that the God who directed my steps from California to Arizona to Owensboro will continue directing my path as I remain faithful to him. So, this is Ron Sharp, and that's part of my story in 7.